There's always people in time that aren't really remembered that are involved with these. There was a guy named Leonard
Oh
Krigo,
God, yeah,
and he was kind of a psychopath that everybody was afraid of,
yeah, that's for
both
sure.
sides of the family.
Yeah,
And
me too.
and I can't find a picture of him. Describe this guy to us, Leonard
Oh,
Krigo.
I couldn't either.
He was called the Arab, right?
They call him the Arab. I had this
Yeah.
informant that told me about him when we were focused in on Carl Spiro, on his little crew and who was part of it. So he tells me about him, and he said, that's the scariest man I ever met. I don't want anything to do with that guy. I got to stay away from him. And what he was finally we figure out who he was. He was a professional criminal. I think he was from Kansas City originally. Spent most of his time in the penitentiary. So what the informant was telling me that Carl Spiro and his cousin Scratch Cousy had a meat market business, so they needed to provide him Krigo with a job, and he could get a parole. So they pulled all the strings they could. We didn't really get into how many strings they had to pull, but he did provide him this job because we didn't even know who he was or that he was out until after he was out. He's out. He, whatever this job is, he never has to show up at it. He comes to Kansas City and he's hanging out with Carl Spiro. He's partying with Carl Spiro. And then shortly after we learn about him, a guy named Al Brandemeyer is a partner with Sabella in the gambling business and in a meat locker. He owns a meat locker.
Yeah.
So BNC meats, Brandemeyer and Sabella meats. And Brandemeyer is walking out one day, I think maybe at the end of the day or something, and a guy shows up with two guns, and two guns are important. Two guns, and robs him of, he claims $10,000 in cash, which would, if you're a bookie, that was likely he could. He probably did it on the payoff day. What's that, Thursday, I think. Puts him in his trunk, and then he just starts shooting into the trunk. It's crazy. I mean, I read the police report. And he starts shooting into the trunk.
He didn't hit him.
He never hits him. Guy got lucky. And he says, you tell Nick Savella the Arabs in town. See, he'd heard all this talk from Carl Spiro about, moving in on the Savellas. So then about a month after that, Leonard Krigo gets arrested robbing a drug house from a real well-known drug dealer over here on the east side named Johnny Jewell. He's robbing the drug house, and one of Jewell's kids slips out and calls the police, and they catch him, and he's carrying two guns in the robbery. So then I look up, we start figuring out who he is, start researching who he is, and I find an old police report for one of his old robberies that he did, what he's went to the penitentiary for, and he robs a grocery store owner, and he has two guns, and he puts a dude in the trunk of his car and then drives him off and leaves him somewhere. He didn't shoot into that trunk. So this guy was consistent with the two guns, putting people in the trunk and that kind of thing.
He was consistent with staying in prison too.
I went down and tried to interview him at the Jackson County Jail. He scared the dog shit out of me. I'll tell you what.
It's fun when you hear about characters like that, because that's what he was. He was a character.
And it was just kind of, he had black curly hair. He looked kind of dark. He looked Sicilian, had black curly hair, and he's a big dude, big muscle, those prison built muscles probably, but he was a big dude and he was strong.
The only thing I could find on him was some court records, but I could also find out that when he was in prison, he ran stuff. So it's obvious that he was a bad guy.
Yeah, that's what they said.
And I just wanted to bring him up because it's like there's always guys like him.
There is.